I'd like to bring on stage Monsieur Canfang, who will be representing the Belgian diplomatic body. Of course, the minister had to leave and be excused for this final part of this panel. To pick up on what Rosa Balfour really mentioned here, ultimately, you're looking at a world that is certainly in many perspectives becoming more dangerous, where a lot of the old rules no longer apply, or there's even a question as to why they should even be applied anymore. Minister Hassler, for you, when you look at the institution, obviously, that you're representing today and this partnership, what is the added value of a cooperation like that? Why is it still relevant if you're operating in this context? What is the case for it?
Thank you very much for this question. I could talk for hours because I think a lot of aspects are so important, but just perhaps let me highlight three aspects. If we look at multilateralism, and you mentioned that in your remarks, I think it's very important that we are willing to learn from each other. And looking at the EEA, of course, we mentioned before, we are comparatively three small states, but from nature, we do not have exactly all over the same interests. I would never have thought in my life that I will learn once so much about fishery and marine policy. But at the end, even though our interests are not always the same, within the EEA we showed that multilateralism also needs pragmatical solutions, the will to learn from each other, and at the end, also the will to find constructive solutions. And I think within the EEA we have been really successful the last 30 years to show that we are able to live this, for me, very important skill within multilateralism. The second one is that I do believe multilateralism, especially in times where we are facing a lot of challenges, on one side, really concrete solutions, and when we look over the 30 years what we achieved, we really achieved concrete solutions and a huge success, but it needs also a holistical approach, and this is what I said before. I think it's much more than just a market. We never lost the idea of what we have been grounded for, internal market, building together an internal market, but we have been open to also look farther and have a wider horizon, and to also have a holistical approach, that this agreement builds also a basis for a lot of other cooperations. I already mentioned them before. And the third point, it's so quickly said as a politician that it's so important to share the same values. And I do really believe, and let me just share a personal remark, that within the EEA, as the closest partnership to the EU, we really reached a point where we can say that sharing the same values is really intrinsically. I remember the night when the war started in Ukraine, and I had a phone call with my Prime Minister. And it was not a second of a question if we are going to implement the sanctions. It was just intrinsically clear that within our partnership, within sharing the same values, we are also going to support Ukraine in the same way like the EU does. And I think really this is something which is more than just saying we have to share the same values. It's really living together in a partnership, the same values. And at least for my country, I can say that we are doing that with a huge support of our population. More than 70% of the people in Liechtenstein are still supporting the EEA very, very much. I would wish that all those agendas are as much supported back home, but I do really believe we can say proudly that we are living within the EEA the same values.
And that's a great point, Minister, because you mentioned that when the war started in Ukraine, there was this idea at the start that this was going to fall on the EU, but all of your countries that you're representing here took positions, so it became obvious this was a European question. It was not just about the EU, fundamentally. And then that gives me a segue now to a question for you, Mrs. Gilbadottir, because we all saw you went to Georgia with your partners from the Baltic countries. That video was everywhere, everyone saw it, and it seemed at that moment, beyond the question of accession, it was again a question about European values. There was something almost at play, the soul of a country, the direction of a country. And I wonder, first, if you can explain why you wanted to go, but how this practically almost fits into what you said. It's something that you have to do on a daily basis almost.
Yeah. Well, the NP8 cooperation, so the Nordic countries with the Baltic countries, we have this formal and informal cooperation. We went to Ukraine together, Moldova, and we put out this statement after the law was passed through the Georgian parliament, and we decided to follow up on that with a visit. It was with a short notice. Aita was, for example, receiving the Danish king to Norway, so he couldn't come. And we had other, the other Nordic ministers had other obligations. So I could go. I was able to go, and I decided to go. And exactly like you say, I mean, the Baltic states have a very unique experience and story. And when they were going through their reforms and desire to belong to the European family, the Nordic countries were there as friends. We supported them. We recognized the regained independence. And now the group is bigger. And again, if there's a good cause to put it out there, we would be ready to do so. And actually, because I was inspired by your talks, I very much agree on the fact, and I think it is, you can't really overestimate, when we look at decisions today that were made decades ago, they all seem so much easier and natural, and of course this was the conclusion, and of course this happened this way, and of course it's a complicated mix of, you're lucky, and it's a matter of timing, and you have to be courageous, but you also have to have a very clear vision. And I sometimes feel that we are too afraid or too shy to just really have the vision and to talk about it, and to be able to talk about it like human beings. Not be so strict in formal checkboxes and talking points. Like, what is this really about? And in Georgia's case, 80% of the population really wants to join the EU, really wants to be part of the transatlantic community. They have been promised, and then they're doing the opposite. And, a friend in need, and we come there and we ask, why would you decide to do that? We're not saying it's not your right. They are sovereign. They are fully, they have the power to do so, but it would have consequences. And I think we need more value-based foreign policy, not less value-based foreign policy. Because eventually, it is about the values, and we have to be ready to, both talk about it, but also act on it, and to be ready to say it out loud. And for us to be able to talk about it also means that we have to be ready to listen. Sometimes I feel that we are too, we put too much time in just saying what has to be said, and then we leave and we run to the next meeting or next gathering or next whatever, and we're not really waiting for the reply. To also just to try to understand where the other person is coming from, or the other country or region or whatever, because it really needs. We have to have the courage and the leadership and the vision to be able to make a stand and to cherish what is worth cherishing.
Thanks for that. And Mr. Aida, I have to also ask you, because your country also took very crystal clear positions when it comes to Ukraine, obviously the combination of Russia. It's not a secret that for the past 2 days you've had an incredibly busy diplomatic agenda. And it seems to me, if I connect them all, that from your perspective, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems the message that you're trying to send is that in the world, there's a number of rules, there's tribunals, there's things that have to be applied, but also applied equally. Yes. To everyone. So I wonder if you could elaborate more on the work you've been doing.
Well, thank you very much for asking that question. I think this is really the drama of the moment, right now. because, as was said, when Russia invaded Ukraine, we all reacted quickly, correctly. We spelled out that this is a blatant violation of international law, and then much of the warfare was a blatant violation of international humanitarian law, and it also broke all the rules of the European Security Order. Thankfully, we saw that right away, as you said in your phone call. We all had these phone calls, and we all said, go for it. Now, the problem, of course, emerged, and thank God, most of the world were with us. Most of the rest of the world were with us on this. Then came the Gaza conflict. And gradually people started to see that although the cause, there was a response to terrorist attacks, let's not forget that, but that much of the warfare were equally in violation of international humanitarian law. And a strong sense of double standards emerged from the rest of the world and Arab world, but Asia, Africa, and Latin America, that increasingly also was seen in our own publics as very problematic. And we've been very adamant we Norway, from an early, and with friends, an early stage, saying that we can't have it that way. The rules are there, rules are rules. And two cases are not similar, but if you have a violation of rules, you have to speak out. Right now, on Friday at 3 o'clock our time, the International Court of Justice, which is everybody's court, is not the ICC, which is 124 countries and to which the US and Israel does not belong. 193 countries in the UN, they all are bound by the International Court of Justice, said stop the operation in Rafah. The operation in Rafah continues, and in 4 hours and a quarter, the Security Council will meet to say, what do we do with this? According to the UN rulebook, they have to react. Let's see. And this is really, and this issue, and coming back to Europe, here we disagree on many things when it comes to the Middle East. No secret, in Europe. But what I'm detecting now is that every single European country that has spoken about us says that international law must apply. So it'd be very interesting to see in the coming hours and days exactly how Europe falls down on this, because we were all quite instrumental when this sort of legal system that we now have were set up. And this is not it's not a point of view that international law is violated. That was until 3 o'clock on Friday. Now it's established by the highest court in the world that all of us are bound with. How do we relate to that? It's a big question about whether international law actually matters. If it does not go the way I hope, I think a lot of people will say that was it. There are no rules.
And that's certainly one of the key points now in the global stage. I am being told some of you are busy and have to continue your busy day in Brussels, so I want to ask two final questions. One for you, Mr. Canfin. Obviously, you're also representing Belgium. You have the rotating presidency of the European Union. There's a lot that's been said, has to be accomplished. You have 2 months, basically, left to do this. What is the number one priority now in your presidency when you look at, on the geopolitical scale? Is it sanctions? Is it advancing on perhaps news on Ukraine and the accession path? What is the one thing that you say, we have a month left, this will be the focus?
Well, that's a good question. It depends to whom you're asking it. If you ask to my colleagues in the permanent representation, they will come with 10 files, each one for Coreper 1 and Coreper 2. I think that it has been said. What we try to do as a presidency, the 13th presidency that we are managing, one month more, it's to pave the way for the further discussion that we will have. One of the things it has been said is the reform of the European Union. You know, we are working in a kind of three-set ensemble. We need to reform. We need a better functioning European Union. We need to prepare for enlargement, and it has been said we are working in a very changing world. I mean, the balance of power is changing. It's what has been called by Luc van Middelaar the return of history after the end of history of Fukuyama. And if you take the what we call l'ensemble commun, it's the reform. We need to reform, and we would like to pave the way for this reform of the EU. It will not be during our presidency. It will not be during the Hungarian presidency. It's an ongoing process, but it is very important if we want to manage our union, or unions, I would say, the EU, but also the EEA for the future, and also in order to tackle the challenges that are in the Prime Minister Letta report. So that is for us very important. We are working on that. We are working, obviously, also to be sure that we have a good strategic agenda adopted by the European Council in order to give some food for thoughts if not direction, for the next Commission. That is really something that we are doing. So it's maybe not, if you allow me, politically very sexy. We want to have a flag saying, okay, we achieved that law and something like that, but it is very important we do that. Really believe that this reform agenda is of the utmost importance if we want to tackle all the challenges that have been well said by the ministers here.
And you have been doing a lot of things also when it comes to the frozen assets, where Belgium, for a very obvious reason, is a key player because of the Euroclear. So it's certainly a very busy agenda. And now the final question for Mr. Šefčovič. You're always very energetic, so here's perhaps the good note, because we've heard the challenges, we've heard the problems, but if we were to make an optimistic case, of course, just to end on an anniversary on a good note, you have the European elections, there's a lot of questions as to who's going to win, who's going to lose, and what the next institution would look like. But if you were to make a positive case for Europe, what would it be at this stage in 2024?
I think that first and foremost, we have to play with our strength. And I think that the fact that we had such a difficult 5 years period and that despite of all odds, we are still biggest trading bloc, we are still biggest trader, we are still biggest investors on a global scale. That's, I think, the statement which we shouldn't forget. Despite of all the drama we went through, inflation, energy prices shock, towards very close to our borders. So this is clearly our strength. And I think that I totally agree with my colleagues that we are again at the time where size matters. So simply, I think that's also one of the reasons why we have to consolidate the political and economic space. I see that we have here the colleagues from San Marino and Andorra with whom we've been negotiating the accession also to make sure that they will be part of the single market. We are working very hard together with our EEA partners to make sure that our single market is like 30 years old, but of course with 30 countries doing it together. And I believe that in 5 years there will be more. That will it be full membership, will it be gradual membership, but clearly these countries would be joining us closer. And we have to simply recognize the fact that a lot of these positive aspects of global cooperation being weaponized, as it was rightly described, energy supplies, critical raw materials, but also sensitive technologies. And we just simply have to equip ourselves to make sure that we will be able to react better. And to end, for a happy ending, you need happy warriors. This is what I understand our citizens want to see in us, that we are optimistic, we believe we can achieve the change, and we are happy to do that. And I think you have, for example, here, I'm sure that there is a lot in our member states. For sure it will be a challenge, but I believe that Europe will make it.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for that. And with that, we have reached the end of the session. It has been a pleasure. Thank you very much, of course, to the ministers, to Mr. Šefčovič, Mr. Canfin. Thank you to all of you. And of course, the conversation on stage ends, but there is a conversation off stage because there is a reception now, and obviously all of you are welcome to join us. Thank you very much. It was a real pleasure. Thanks.
I have to